Starting now, you can get a transcript of each week's Rich Dad radio show. Just visit www.richdad.com/radio and download a copy today.
This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello. This is Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Question is, who are you? And today's program is, we're going to find out, it's all about who you are. And the questions are like, are you in the right place? Are you doing what you really should be doing? Are you maximizing your core tendencies? Who are you? Maybe it's time for you to move on. And it's very important today because with more and more technology, we're able to better define who we are and put ourselves in the right places that we can maximize and feel best about ourselves. So anyway, fabulous program today. Our special guest is Gretchen Rubin. She's a best-selling author, speaker, and one of today's most influential and thought-provoking observers of happiness and human nature. Today we'll be talking about her book, The 4 Tendencies. We're going to find out who you are, the indispensable personality profiles that reveal how to make your life better and other people's lives better too. Any comments there, Kim?
Yeah, I love how to make your life better and other people's lives better too, because we talk about in the cash flow quadrant the 4 types of people. There are in the business world, there are the employees, self-employed, business owners, and investors. And I'm wondering, as we get into talking with Gretchen, do these tendencies also apply to those different quadrants? Or is there a tendency that makes a better entrepreneur, and is there a tendency that makes a better employee? And I think what else is crucial in Gretchen's book is how to talk with these different personalities. And I think that's where it makes your life better and other people's lives better too. So there's a lot to discuss here.
So Gretchen, welcome to the Rich Dad Radio Show.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm so happy to be talking to you.
Thank you.
We're happy to have you.
So who are you, Gretchen? Give us a little about your background.
How long do you have?
Give us a little about your background and how...
As you said, my name is Gretchen Rubin. I'm an author. I've written many best-selling books about sort of happiness, good habits, and human nature. So my book, The Happiness Project, is all about how to be happier. My book, Better Than Before, is about how to make or break your habits. And then my latest book, The 4 Tendencies, is all about this personality profiles that you were alluding to, where I think if you know which of these 4 categories you fit into, you're better able to figure out how to set things up for yourself so that you're likely to succeed, or you're better able to set something up for someone else to make it easier to manage conflict and burnout and kind of just being puzzled by why someone's behaving the way they are. I also have a podcast called Happier with Gretchen Rubin, where I talk about how to be happier with my co-host and sister, Elizabeth Kraft. We grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, but now she is a TV writer and producer living in L.A. So we talk about our different perspectives on happiness.
And your academic background is, I understand you went to Yale Law School?
I did. I went to Yale Law School, and I was actually clerking for Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, a fellow Arizona person, for you. I was clerking for Justice O'Connor when I realized that I actually wanted to be a writer. So I had a great run in law, but then I decided I wanted to switch.
And how did you get from law school into writing about happiness? It seems something like just juxtaposed, whatever that word is.
Well, it's interesting. The Happiness Project was really my 5th book.
Which was a number 1 bestseller too.
It was a number 1 bestseller. It was on the bestseller list for like 2 years. But like many people, it took me 10 years to be an overnight sensation. Yep. So I had been writing for quite some time. By the time all my books look very different, but they really are all about human nature. So I wrote a biography of Winston Churchill, a biography of JFK, and some other books that are all really about human nature. But it's the happiness and habits books probably that people associate with me most.
So I'm interested to hear about that. Did you figure out why JFK was so happy?
Oh, well, at that time I wasn't thinking about happiness per se, but, it's interesting to study huge figures like JFK or Winston Churchill because they're so gigantic and we have so much evidence about their lives and what they did, and they were involved in so much and part of so many big events that you can really see human nature clearly in a way that you can't see with just an ordinary person or yourself.
Correct.
And so I was drawn to these big characters and kind of the nature of biography, the problems presented about how do we tell someone else's story How do we think about someone else? And I was just fascinated by both those characters. Yeah.
So this program is about who are you? Are you in the right place, the right time, doing what you really should do? And the shift from being in the business of the law to happiness is a pretty radical shift there. So anyway, would you mind giving us some ideas on what the 4 tendencies are?
Oh, okay. So most people, this profiles will divide people into upholders, questioners, obligers, and rebels. And most people, I'm going to give a very brief description, and most people can tell what they are just from the brief description. But if you want to take a quiz that will give you an answer, you can take it on my site, GretchenRubin.com. Like 1.3 million people have taken this quiz. It's free. It's quick. But like I say, most people, I'll just give a brief description, and a lot of people know what they are right away. So it has to do with how you respond to expectations. And we all face 2 kinds of expectations.
And what do you mean? What do you mean by expectations?
So we both face 2 kinds. And so there are outer expectations. And so these are the expectations that other people put on you. So you have a deadline at work, or a friend asks you to do something. That's an outer expectation. And then there are the expectations that we put on ourselves, the things we ask of ourselves. So I want to keep a New Year's resolution. I want to get back into practicing guitar. These are things that I'm asking of myself. So depending on how you respond to outer and inner expectations, that's where your tendency comes in. And so it's a very narrow aspect of your personality, but it's quite significant. It comes up in a lot of contexts. So upholders readily meet outer and inner expectations. They meet the work deadline. They keep the New Year's resolution without much fuss. They want to know what other people expect from them, but their expectations for themselves are just as important.
So they keep their agreements to themselves. If they want to go and exercise at the gym, they're pretty good. Is it discipline? Are they disciplined?
Well, I try to stay away from words like discipline, because what I'm talking about is just being able to carry through on an inner expectation. Because discipline can look different depending on which tendency you are. So let's come back to that. Very important question. But then there are questioners, and questioners question all expectations. They'll do something if they think it makes sense. So they make everything an inner expectation, because if it meets their standard, they'll do it. If it fails their standard, they will push back. They always want to know why. So they're very interested in justification. They resist anything they consider arbitrary or irrational. But if it's an inner expectation, they will follow through, no problem.
So, for example, we deal a lot of times. Okay, let's say we're talking about real estate. We have people that are looking at a real estate property, and they do analysis up one side and down the other, and to the point where they're analysis paralysis and nothing happens. Would they be a questioner?
That's a very good sign that it's a questioner.
Okay.
Yes, wanting to know why. Not being able to act unless it's clear which is the right answer, feeling very uncomfortable with anything that seems arbitrary, like, I don't know, why do we have to do this by Friday? It's like, why? We just do, that's questioner. Then there are obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. And I got my insight into this tendency when a friend of mine said, I don't understand it. I know I would be happier if I exercised, and when I was in high school, I was on the track team, and I never missed track practice. So why can't I go running now? It's like, oh, well, when you had a team and a coach, or when you have a boss, or when someone's expecting something from you from the outside, you can follow through. But when it's just your own inner expectation, it's a challenge.
But did you say upholders meet exterior?
Outer and inner.
Outer and inner.
Outer and inner, and obligers meet outer, but they struggle to meet inner. So they would have trouble keeping the New Year's resolution, for instance.
Okay.
Then there are rebels, and rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do in their own way, in their own time. They can do anything they want to do, anything they choose to do. But if you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to resist. And often they don't even want to tell themselves what to do. Like they don't like using to-do lists. They might not sign up for a class at 10 a.m. on Saturdays because they're like, I don't know what I'm going to want to do at 10 a.m. on Saturday. Now, there's always a rebel who does it, so I would never say never, but typically that's what you see with rebels.
So let me ask you this. What's the problem how does this resolve personal conflicts? I'm giving an example of an upholder. Is it possible an upholder be in a rebel position?
You mean, would an upholder be working with a rebel, and what would the conflict be?
Is it possible to switch? Sometimes you might be in an upholder's position, but you're a rebel at the core. It's kind of I'm looking for the possible conflict.
Well, really, I think that this is part of your genetically hardwired part of your personality. I think most people really do fit, right within one tendency. So it's not like you're one at 20 and one at 40 years old, or you're one at work and one at home. But the same behavior can look different depending on why you're doing what you're doing. So, like, as an upholder, it's very easy for me to meet expectations. And so you could be like, oh, well, she's doing that because she's an upholder. But if I'm a rebel, I might be like, you know what, I exercise every day because I'm an athlete. That's who I want to be. And, like, people at work, they want to keep me trapped behind my computer screen, but they can't because I want to get out there and run, so I'm going to do what I want to do. We're both doing the same thing, but we're doing it from a different place.
So was your purpose for writing The Four Tendencies, which is a fantastic book for our times, was to make people more aware and be able to get along with the different types of tendencies?
Absolutely, because often there's conflict or puzzlement because people don't understand why other people aren't kind of getting with the program or why they're not responding. So
why they're not like me.
Yeah, exactly. That, you put your finger on it. The whole thing is people assume that other people basically are like they are. And often people are very different, and they need different kinds of language. They need a very different kind of setup. For instance, something that comes up in the workplace a lot is obligers really need accountability. They need to be accountable to someone else. So they need deadlines. They need supervision. They need to be on a team. They need to know that someone's checking on them, that's how they thrive and that's how they succeed. Rebels will often resist accountability. The fact that somebody's looking over their shoulder makes them want to resist and not do it. And so if I'm a boss and I'm like, well, let's talk about some deadlines, and why don't we check in every week and you can update me on your progress. Well, for an obliger, that would be great. For a rebel, that could make me very resistant and very difficult to work with. If I know, well, these two people might need a different kind of situation, we can set it up so that they will both do their best work.
And so that's what you're covering in your Four Tendencies.
Yes.
Book. Once again, it's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Our guest today is Gretchen Rubin. She's a best-selling author, speaker, and one of today's most influential and thought-provoking observers of happiness and human nature. Her website is GretchenRubin.com. So when we come back, we'll be talking more about, are you in your right position? And most important, who are you?
You're listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki.
Don't be like Charlie. Charlie is that do-it-yourselfer who does himself in. Do-it-yourself is good for tile and grout. It is not good for asset protection. Charlie thought he'd save a few dollars forming his LLC online. With no guidance, he did it wrong. When he sold the property, he lost thousands and thousands of dollars. He did himself in by trying to do it himself. Don't burn yourself. Use Corporate Direct to set up and maintain your LLCs and corporations. Corporate Direct is owned and operated by attorney and rich dad advisor Garrett Sutton. Garrett wrote the bestsellers Loopholes of Real Estate and Start Your Own Corporation. He is Robert Kiyosaki's attorney for asset protection. He and his team will do it right. Visit them at corporatedirect.com or call 800-600-1760. Mention Rich Dad and receive $100 off your formation fee. That's corporatedirect.com. corporatedirect.com.
Your financial education continues. Now back to Robert Kiyosaki and the Rich Dad Radio Show.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And our question today is, who are you? You know, we have the technology now to better define who we are, and you may as well find out who you really are deep down at the core. Our guest today is Gretchen Rubin, and she's a best-selling author and speaker of her latest book, The Four Tendencies. Once again, you can listen to the Rich Dad Radio program anytime, anywhere on iTunes or Android. And all of our programs are archived at richdadradio.com. We archive at richdadradio.com because repetition is one of the ways humans learn best. For example, it's almost impossible to learn golf swinging the club once. You must swing it probably a couple of million times. But that's how we learn. So we archive all of our programs at richdadradio.com. And that way you can listen to this program again, pick up things you might have missed. You'll pick up 10 times more than you listened to it the first time. But more importantly, we archive them so you can talk to your friends, family, and business associates. Have them listen to this program with Gretchen Rubin and then discuss it, because you want to know who you are, but also, que pasa, who you're hanging out with, who's around you. So with that, comments, Kim?
Yes. Well, Gretchen, okay, so you talk about the 4 tendencies, the upholder, the obliger, the questioner, and the rebel. So at Rich Dad, we have the cash flow quadrant. And the cash flow quadrant is the 4 types of people in the world of business. There's the employee who works for someone. There's a self-employed who works for themselves. There's the business owner who has other people working for them. And there's
it's 500 people.
500 people or more.
Quite a difference.
And the investor has their money working for them. So do these tendencies, would they relate to, is there a tendency that makes a better employee and versus an entrepreneur? Are they different tendencies for success?
Well, there's so many qualities in a person that make them good at a certain role. So I think it's very hard to say, like, all rebels make good entrepreneurs, because it depends on so many things, how ambitious they are, what they're interested in, their skills match, all these things. But I will say that there are some generalities, because I think people who are very successful figure out how to harness the strengths of their tendency and also how to offset the negatives of their tendency, because all of these tendencies have strong points but then also weaknesses and limitations. Now, many rebels, for instance, like to work for themselves, because what is at the core of the rebel tendency is, I don't want someone else telling me what to do. And so many rebels really thrive on starting something, being the boss, doing things their own way, in their own time. Maybe I'm going to work till 2 a.m. tonight, and that's okay, because no one's going to tell me I have to show up at a certain place. Rebels also often tend to like to work in sales, because in sales it's like, man, whatever you need to do to make that sale, that is okay. Because it's like, and they can do it. But interestingly, some rebels like to work at big companies with lots of rules, and rebels have said how they sort of need a structure to push against. Some rebels kind of stall out. Now you take something like questioners. Now questioners, they always want to know why they should do something. So they might be a great entrepreneur, they might be a great investor, they might be a great employee, might be a great leader. But what they're not going to do well is at a company where it's like, hey, man, this is a team. We take we're going to take our lead from corporate, and what we've done in the past is working really well. We need to do that. You need to get with the program and follow on. That often doesn't work with questioners, because they're like, well, why should I? Just the fact that we've done it that way before doesn't mean we should do it again. Why am I listening to you? In some workplaces, that kind of questioning is very rewarded. In some workplaces, it's not rewarded. So if you're a questioner, you want to get yourself to a place where your questioning is going to be appreciated and valued. Obligers do great work, but they often do not make great self-starters. And so often, like if they go freelance or they go to start their own thing, they very quickly need to give themselves some kind of outer accountability so that they don't stall out.
So if an obliger is going to start their own business, they need somebody, a coach or a mentor or somebody to hold them accountable, somebody that they're going to struggle on their own.
A mentor or coach is great. That's a great solution. Another thing is, like, let's say you're starting a business. You're starting like an e-course business. Well, maybe you're going to go ahead and say to 10 people, I'm going to give you my e-course for free. Okay, because now you've got customers. They're not paid customers, but you could create customers or clients or students, somebody who's waiting for you. And so you're like, well, I have to do this because I want to start this wedding photography business. Well, I'm going to book a wedding. Now I've got to get everything organized because these people are expecting me to show up and take photographs. So there's lots of ways to create outer accountability. But if you're just like, oh, I've always wanted to start my own textile business online, let me get that going, that's when obligers can get into trouble. Because if there's nothing coming to them from the outside that's creating that outer accountability, that's when they can stall out. They need a coach, a mentor, a client, a customer, something like that.
I would think for obligers, they need a partner who is opposite to them.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that you see when rebels pair up, either in romance or in work, like if you have a founding team, if it's a rebel, it's almost always a rebel paired with an obliger. That's by far the most common pattern. But obligers themselves are the ones that match up most easily with the other 4 tendencies. They're like type O, and they're obligers because they can get along most easily with the other 3.
So let me ask you this. You also say that of the 4 tendencies, as you call them, rebels are the smallest. Why is that?
So yeah, rebel is the smallest. It's conspicuous, but it's small. Only slightly bigger than rebel is upholder. That's my tendency, by the way. I'm an upholder. Those are the small kind of extreme tendencies. The biggest tendency by a fair amount is obliger. For both men and women, that is the one, you either are an obliger or you have many obligers in your life. They're a big tendency, and behind them is questioner, which is interesting because if you're managing a team or you're developing a curriculum or you're coming up with a device or a message, you want to think about the fact, well, most of the people that you're dealing with are going to be obligers or questioners, so you can take that into account when you're setting up your design.
So if you have a business and you have to build and you're building a team, is it beneficial to have different people with different tendencies on your team?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think what happens is, and this is true of any kind of trait that people have, if you have too much of one thing, everybody's like, oh, this works great because it works with questioners. And it's like, okay, but what about people who aren't questioners? Or maybe you're overloading people who aren't questioners. You need to have a balance of everything because it's great to have questioners because they're like, well, why should we do this? And rebels are like, gosh, who cares what anybody else is doing? Let's break the mold. Let's do things our own way. Obligers are the one who are going to really make sure that follow through is there. And upholders are very good at just driving processes forward, and they don't have to have any kind of supervision. So they each bring a strength, but then they each have corresponding weaknesses. And so you need the strengths of the others to balance out the weaknesses that the others have. So that's why you need a mix, because then you get that good mix of strengths.
And that's why your book is so important. Again, it's called The Four Tendencies, the indispensable personality profiles that reveal how to make your life better, and other people's lives better too. And Gretchen, you say you have a small, free, online profile quiz or something?
Yes. You can go to my website, GretchenRubin.com, and just search for quiz, and you'll find it right away. And that's a quiz that will tell you what your tendency is.
Well, that's a very, very important track. So interesting, you say the rebels and upholders are the smallest number, and questioners and obligers are the biggest number.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And let me ask you this, Gretchen. Because as I read this, I haven't taken the quiz yet, but as I read this, I'm a rebel. The subtitle of my book is Because I Hate Being Told What to Do.
There you go.
So that's pretty obvious. But I also see myself in some of these other tendencies. So is it possible that it's a mix, that we all have a little bit of all of this in us?
Well, we all have a little bit of everything. Like, we're all willing to do something that's important to somebody else, even if we don't want to do it because we value other people. None of us want to be told what to do. We like to have choice. None of us like to do things that are arbitrary or obviously pointless. So we each have a little bit of it, but I think there is kind of an instinctive response that dominates, that can be very helpful in understanding how do you set up situations in a way that's going to suit you best and make it easier for you to thrive. And if you're having conflict with somebody else, maybe give you a vocabulary for understanding why someone else might do better. Just to take a very tiny example, I remember talking to somebody where she was an upholder like me, and she was like, I don't understand why my son wants to take one of these classes to study for the graduate exam. If it's important to him, he should just get a book and study on his own. And I'm like, your son is saying he needs to take a class. He's probably an obliger, and he knows that he's not going to do the work to prepare for the test unless he's in a class. Don't get in his way. If he's saying that's what he needs to succeed, help him. Don't tell him, oh, you don't need that, because you don't need that. Just because one person can thrive in a certain kind of circumstance doesn't mean that other people would necessarily thrive. So it's all about just getting insight into how people might be like you and might be different from you.
We at Rich Dad use Kolbe, Kolbe, and we used to use human synergetics, DISC. What's the difference between your test or profile versus, let's say, DISC or Kolbe?
I love personality frameworks, and I think they're all helpful, and they all have their own nuance and their own power and their own vocabulary. But I think that if you try to match them up, a lot of times people are trying to say this tendency equals that in this other framework. I think you kind of lose some of that subtlety. And so I think what I like about my framework is that it's very narrow. Some of these others are trying to paint a whole picture of you, like what are you going to look like at work, like a whole picture of you. This is very narrow because you could look, 50 rebels could look totally different from each other depending on how ambitious they are, how intellectual they are, how considerate of other people's feelings they are, how introverted or extroverted they are. All these things would make them very different, except in one respect they would be the same, which is if you asked them to do something, they would say, you're not the boss of me, because that is what it is to be a rebel. So I think my framework is helpful because it's very narrow, but but it lets you kind of go deep in this one very significant aspects of how people behave and why they do what they do and why they don't do what they don't do.
Well, once again, it's Robert Kiyosaki. I want to thank Gretchen Rubin. We're out of time. It goes so quickly. So once again, Gretchen Rubin, her book is The Four Tendencies. And her other book, I like the title, is Better Than Before. Her website is GretchenRubin.com.
And Gretchen, what I like about your book a lot is you talk about the four tendencies, but you talk about the strengths. You also talk about the weaknesses. And I know there's people listening going, oh, yeah, I've been trying to get on that diet. Oh, yeah, I've been trying to do this. And you give solutions onto how to overcome the weaknesses on each of the tendencies, which I think is really valuable.
Oh, well, that's terrific to hear.
So, Gretchen, thank you very much, and good luck on your crusade to give people more awareness of who they really are. So once again, when we come back, we'll be going to Ask Robert.
You're listening to The Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki.
Don't be like Charlie. Charlie is that do-it-yourselfer who does himself in. Do-it-yourself is good for tile and grout. It is not good for asset protection. Charlie thought he'd save a few dollars forming his LLC online. With no guidance, he did it wrong. When he sold the property, he lost thousands and thousands of dollars. He did himself in by trying to do it himself. Don't burn yourself. Use Corporate Direct to set up and maintain your LLCs and corporations. Corporate Direct is owned and operated by attorney and rich dad advisor Garrett Sutton. Garrett wrote the bestsellers Loopholes of Real Estate and Start Your Own Corporation. He is Robert Kiyosaki's attorney for asset protection. He and his team will do it right. Visit them at corporatedirect.com or call 800-600-1760. Mention Rich Dad and receive $100 off your formation fee. That's corporatedirect.com. corporatedirect.com.
Log on to richdadradio.com while you listen. Now back to Robert Kiyosaki.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news about bad news about money. Asking the question, who are you? So I want to thank our special guest today, Gretchen Rubin. She's the author of The Four Tendencies, The Upholder, The Questioner, Obligers, and Rebels. So you can go to our website, GretchenRubin.com, and you can take to find out who you really are. So now coming to the most popular part of our program, it is Ask Robert. That's where you get to ask us your questions. So you can submit your questions to Ask Robert at richdadradio.com. So, Melissa, what's the first question?
Our first question today comes from Harper in Kansas City, Missouri. Favorite book, Rich Woman.
Hey, Harper. Thank you very much.
The question is this. Robert and Kim, I'm thinking about bringing on a partner in my real estate investment business. My question is, since the two of you have both a personal and business relationship, do you think it's best to have partners who are more like yourself than not? With you and Robert, are you both alike, or would you say you're very different in terms of how you approach business?
Well, that's a fantastic question,
really
but the first person I would bring on in a partnership is an attorney. And I'm not kidding you, is that because the odds of a partnership making it are slim to none. So before you form the partnership, you need to have how we're going to dissolve this partnership. So that's sometimes called a buy-sell agreement and all this. It's a more professional thing to do because Kim and I have brought on partners and it's been, should I say, disastrous. And it's not been easy. But the reason it's disastrous is because we don't know who the partner is. And it goes beyond the four tendencies. It goes on to their values, their backgrounds. Are they liars? Are they scum? Are they good people? What's their experience? And you don't know that. It's like getting married. You really don't know who you're getting married to. So like many people have prenups in today's modern world, I would call an attorney the first thing and set up a buy-sell before you sign a partnership agreement. Any comments, Kim?
Okay, that's good advice. I got to say that's very good advice. I would also say that that's a pretty appropriate question for our subject today with the 4 tendencies, because one thing that Gretchen said, she said, one thing is if you're a rebel, oftentimes they hook up with an obliger because there's different tasks to be done and we're not all good at both tasks. I would also say this about having two people that are very much alike. There's a saying that said if two partners agree on everything, then one of you is irrelevant. So you might want to look for somebody who's a little bit different too. I mean, there's pros and cons to both. There really is. But the most important thing, I'm going to say the most important thing in a partnership is that you are both aligned to the mission and you're both aligned to the philosophy of what you're building.
Yeah, but you don't know that because, our CEO, Mike Sullivan, in his prior life before becoming CEO of Rich Dad, he was an attorney for families and more specifically adoptions.
Private adoptions, yes.
And one of the things he told me is that a lot of times people get married, they say I do with their fingers crossed. I promise to love you and all this. But he said something I still laugh about today. He says, if somebody is lying, like, I'm never going to leave you, I'm going to be faithful and all that. If they're lying, he says, the lie can only last 14 months. And after 14 months, the lie gets to them. So I don't know if that's true or not because I'm not a therapist or any of that stuff. But from Mike's experience, it says most liars can last 14 months. And I think that's good advice. So get that prenup and get that buy-sell agreement up front because it's really hard to do when you think you're in love and one of them's a liar.
And I'm going to also say, you may want to take the 4 tendencies quiz. You might want to take the Kolbe, Kolbe profile.
Yeah, we love Kolbe. That's
to
good.
Find out who each of you really are and what your tendencies, what your strengths and weaknesses are. I think that alone is going to be invaluable, whether you partner or not.
But that doesn't measure the core value of that person. And when you're all excited about either marriage or a business, it's delusional. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Preston in Elkhart, Indiana. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. When you look at possibly investing in another company, what are the traits you look for in the leader of that business? Have you ever considered investing in a business but then didn't because of who was running it?
All the time. And by
yes.
the way, I love Elkhart, Indiana. I think you guys are the mobile home capital of the world or something like that. But anyway. Yeah, it's a tough question. I mean, I have finally, when I had no money, nobody ever wanted to borrow money from me or invest in money. But as we got smarter and richer and more successful, I had to be more careful who I loaned money to. And at this point right now, if the banks won't lend them money, I won't lend them money. It's kind of especially if they're small. I don't have a track record of them. So there's a reason banks are there, and it's to loan people money. And the mistakes I've made is I've had friends and, really good people with great products, but then they don't have any business experience. They're S's, they're small businessmen, they're self-employed. And it's different when you're taking on partners and you're actually building a B quadrant business. It's extremely different. Any comments, Kim?
Well, I think it's the most important thing is who you're dealing with, who you're doing business with. So if you're looking at investing
but you can never tell either.
Well, no, but you got to trust. You can trust first of all, trust your instinct. You can find out, as you said, Robert, what is their track record? Have they built businesses before? How successful have they been? For example, we were looking at investing in this one company, and the guys were they were flaky. There was just they weren't keeping their agreements. They weren't doing what they said they were going to do. And both of us had a really bad feeling because we don't want to deal with flaky people. Well, it turns out there's something they didn't disclose, which was that they had less than a year earlier been shut down by the SEC. And they didn't disclose that. I mean, and of course, we're not about to touch that, but you got to really pay attention. I think it's the most important part is who is running that business, and do they have the experience, as you said, Robert? Are they building a big business? Are they self-employed? Do they have the track record?
What's their experience?
What's their experience?
You pull their financials, and
Yep.
if they don't have, Rich Dad Poor Dad is basically a book on accounting, income statement, and balance sheet. If they don't have a financial statement, don't do business with them because they're amateurs. This one person I know, he had a great product, yada, yada, yada. I looked at the product and all this. And we did some other work together, and he called me up just angry at me. I said, what are you angry about? He says, you haven't paid me. And I said, have you invoiced me? He says, I don't have to invoice you. You should know how much you owe me. And I went, oh, my God. I mean, this guy had no idea what an invoice was. You know, I say, I pay on invoice. Well, we had a handshake. This guy was an S, you know, successful S. But
we didn't know what we owed him. We didn't know what we owed him. I didn't know. He didn't send me an invoice. And this other person, this friend of mine, you know, he only wanted to borrow $1.2 million. And I asked him, I said, have you asked the bank for the money? He goes, well, they won't lend me any money. So I said, well, why should I lend you the money? And when I did my research and dug into it, because we're real estate people, guy had tax lien, back taxes not paid. The reason he was in trouble is he had 5 kids and none of the kids worked. And he believed in taking care of his family, and he believed I should take care of his family too. Yeah, when you asked him, well, how's the money going to be used? Oh, it's going to go to I'm going to pay my kids.
Yeah.
I'm going to pay my kids, and so give me $1.2 million. Excuse me?
But in his understanding, in his value system, I'm supposed to take care of his kids. And I said, just because we're friends doesn't mean your kids are my kids. What don't you love my kids? I said, I love them, but I'm not going to give them a dime. And so that's kind of the hornet's nest or rat's nest you run into when it comes to this subject of money. So it's best to be professional. If they don't have financials and you can't pull, you know, all the other reports on them, don't do business.
And one other point is know what questions to ask. So, for example, I've got a call tomorrow on this investment Robert and I are looking at, and I'm going through it all because I'm going to be asking all these questions. And basically, how do I get my money back? Where's the money going to? Who are your customers? Da-da-da-da. So know what questions to ask as well. Don't go into it blindly.
That's crucial. And you know, Kim and I have made quote unquote mistakes by investing with not the wrong people, but people with different points of view on business. And some of these people, if I mention their names, they're famous. They're famous. But would I invest with them again? Answer is no. So even they're rich and famous or poor and struggling, you still got to be careful. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Cliff in Andover, Maryland. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It says, Robert, I understand the importance of getting the proper financial education prior to making any investments. But my question is, there is so much in the marketplace right now. What do you recommend I start with first?
Well, it depends on what business you're getting into, but there are certain things you've got to do as an entrepreneur, and one of them is, can you sell? You know, I don't care if you sell door-to-door or face-to-face or online. There's only one place money comes from, and that's from somebody else's wallet. You know, so if you can't sell, if you can't get that person to separate their hard-earned money and give it to you, then you're going to be out of business anyway. And what happens for most people is they can't sell. In other words, let's say they owe, their overhead is $1,000 a month, but they can only sell $500 a month. That means they're going negative $500 a month. So that's why my first real business education started when I left the Marine Corps and joined Xerox, so I could sell more than I ate, which was a big task. But learning to sell, then I had to learn how to present and talk, then write and do copy and all this. I come from the communication side. There's a thing called the BI triangle, which is in our third book, Rich Dad's Guide to Investing, is most people don't have the entrepreneurial skills. And the number one skill for an entrepreneur is selling. But that's not the only skill. You also have to understand tech. You have to understand the legal, understand accounting, what financial statements are, leadership, discipline. So most people don't make it big. I think they don't have the discipline to learn. I know Gretchen Rubin doesn't care for the word discipline, but let me tell you something. It's crucial in the world when you want to be successful. Like I may want to be one of the best swimmers in the world, but I don't want to swim. I don't want to practice. Well, sweetheart, you're not going to make the Olympics, So that's the word. A lot of people, I don't like discipline. I like being told what to do. I'm not going to do this. Well, sometimes you have to. And I think one of the biggest mistakes I hear in the world today, well, do what you love and the money will follow. Well, that's an idiot speaking there. Sometimes you have to do what you don't want to do. And sometimes you have done to you what you don't want done to you. So those are, in my experiences, the real thing. And I get a little nauseous and say, I really love it. Hey, I love my work. I'm passionate about my work. And Kim and I always talk about it. Passion is different than purpose. Passion is what you want to do. Purpose is what God wants you to do. And there's two different things, absolutely two different things. So the people who do what they want to do, they generally remain small. Whereas a purpose-driven person must be inclusive because the purpose is much bigger than the individual. So passion is for, let's say, small people. Purpose is for big people. That's very simply it. Purpose is doing what God needs done. So Kim and I founded the Rich Dad Company because we need financial education. The hard part about it is I'm going up against the academic system, people with no financial education, but they have college degrees. Most of them are idiots as far as I'm concerned, but they can't, it's like my poor dad, great guy, PhD and all this. He couldn't punch his way out of a paper bag. He threw him on the streets once he lost his job. He was a good man, don't get me wrong, honest, hardworking man. He took on the governor of the state of Hawaii, who was a crook, and he lost his job. But once he was outside the academic system, the paycheck system of schools and government benefits and all that, he couldn't survive. He did not have, let's say, the guts, the discipline, and the skills to survive on the streets. So that's really what it takes. And those are the questions you have to ask yourself is what happens if you have no money? How good are you? And who are you? And do you have it to make it? Or are you going to turn into a rat and screw everybody to take the money? And Kim and I have run into a lot of rats out there. A lot of rats. Right, Kim?
Yes, we have. Yes, we have.
So once again, I wish there was an easy answer to this whole thing. But as you can tell, we at Rich Dad like to just call it as we see it. Right or wrong, that's how we see it. So once again, thank you for asking your questions. Submit your questions to Ask Robert at richdadradio.com. And once again, thank you to Gretchen Rubin. Thank you for listening.
Hà diều đã bóng nắng cháy giữa đồng, kỷ niệm yêu thương trong mỗi ngày, tiếng ru gọi hãy nhớ biết bao. Tôi xa quê bao năm tháng qua, nhưng trong trái tim không bao giờ xa. Lời mẹ ru con hiu hiu chưa hè, mùa lụt nước lũ bắt